who secretly approved a sweeping AI surveillance system, one that had already tracked 12.4 million citizens in silence. But the real shock comes when Crockett reveals a hidden truth. Blacklock didn't just endorse the system, he profited from it. When a judge is bought, who will protect the people? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At exactly 6 a.m., while most of Texas was still asleep, the office of the governor dropped a digital bombshell. A sudden, unexplained bulletin flashed across every official state terminal. Sentinel X will be activated statewide in 72 hours. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a cold, automated notice declaring the launch of a massive AI-driven surveillance system. The name meant nothing to the public until it meant everything. Sentinel X. It sounded like a weapon, and in many ways it was. Within minutes, legal offices, police departments, and tech contractors across the state scrambled to understand what had just been authorized. But the answer was buried in one line of legal jargon attached to the bulletin, per Authorization 88 Texas 42, signed by Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock. There had been no bill, no debate, no public disclosure, just a silent decree hiding behind the veil of emergency legislation. No committee had reviewed the plan. No legislative body had seen the system specs. There were no public hearings, no privacy evaluations, not even a press release to warn Texans that their lives were about to be monitored in real time by an invisible machine. But the legal seal was there, Blacklock's signature inked in blue across a high-resolution PDF. The justification? Reducing the burden on law enforcement through proactive algorithmic monitoring. In plain terms, let the AI police the people. Buried in a 5-page document was the power to surveil 30 million lives. And as the sun rose over Austin, the government's silence was louder than a siren. Something colossal had shifted in the state, and no one was ready for what came next. That was when Jasmine Crockett's encrypted inbox pinged. The subject line was a single word: run. Attached was a file with no sender, no traceable IP, just a cold block of metadata. She opened it and froze. Line after line of technical code spilled across the screen. Embedded access protocols, biometric sampling schematics, voice print archiving systems, all tied directly to Sentinel X. Then came the sentence that stopped her breath. System default is 24/7 passive facial recognition, applied statewide. No consent required, no opt-out. Crockett's heart pounded. Whoever sent this wasn't just warning her, they were handing her the weapon to fight back. And they trusted only one person in Texas to do it. As the Capitol's marble corridors remained quiet, Jasmine stood up from her desk, eyes blazing, whispering one promise under her breath. They will not get away with this. When Jasmine Crockett finished reading the anonymous file, her hands didn't tremble, but the system should have. Because what she held wasn't just data, it was a confession encoded in circuit diagrams and legal signatures. And it had one name written all over it: Jimmy Blacklock. She had 24 hours to confront the man who turned justice into a ghost, and she wasn't going in quietly. By sunrise the next day, the Texas Capitol no longer resembled a seat of governance. It felt like a crime scene waiting for tape. Jasmine Crockett, invoking an obscure emergency statute buried in the state oversight charter, had successfully forced the assembly of a full congressional hearing in less than 24 hours. Something so rare, even senior staffers were digging through old procedural handbooks to confirm it was legal. The Committee on Technology and Civil Liberties, normally a sleepy subdivision with polite arguments over broadband subsidies, was now ground zero in what the press was calling the digital trial of the century. The atmosphere wasn't political, it was electric. Security flooded the building. Staffers shouted names into phones, sprinting across tile floors in heels and badge lanyards. The media presence was overwhelming. 12 major networks rerouted live crews to Austin, drones hovered over the rotunda, and makeshift studios were set up in the cafeteria. More than 39 million viewers tuned in live, some from cell phones, others from living rooms, all asking the same question. Had Texas created a machine more powerful than its people? And then, as if the moment itself were scripted for silence, the massive oak doors at the rear of the chamber creaked open. Jimmy Blacklock entered with the measured calm of a man who believed in the inevitability of his own authority. He wore a tailored navy suit so sharp it looked pressed by fear itself. In his hand, he held a leather-bound notebook, black, creaseless, unmarked. His eyes, cold and unreadable, scanned the chamber like a surgeon observing a patient he'd already decided not to save. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. The silence that followed was unnatural, not the respectful kind, the kind you feel before impact. He took a seat slowly, deliberately, placed the notebook in front of him like it was a sacred text, then adjusted the silver pin on his tie before speaking. When he opened his mouth, his voice was smooth as glass, measured, practiced, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Sentinel X is not surveillance. It is stability. It does not possess bias. It does not fatigue. It does not operate on emotion or error. It is, quite simply, the most impartial form of justice ever constructed. His words hung in the air like smoke in a sealed room. Reporters paused their typing. Legislators leaned back in their chairs. For a moment, it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't scribble a note or glance at her staff. She simply watched him, her eyes narrowing like a lens adjusting to perfect clarity. Because the man before her had just tried to rename tyranny, and she had come to make sure the world knew its real name. Blacklock's words were engineered, smooth, sterile, meant to anesthetize the room. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to argue with philosophy. She came to drag it down into the dirt where real people live, and where artificial justice had already begun to leave real scars. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She reached for the remote like a surgeon reaching for a scalpel. Then she pressed play. The room darkened as the lights dimmed to a dusky amber, the kind that shifts focus and thickens breath. Every screen in the chamber blinked on, casting sharp reflections onto the mahogany desks and stone walls. For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then the image resolved. Surveillance footage, time-stamped, labeled in government font. Bexar County Test Grid. Sentinel X Phase 2. Internal use only. The camera panned over a modest church sanctuary, wooden pews lined with faded cushions, stained glass, filtered sunlight across the tiled floor, and a soft hum of movement suggested an ordinary Thursday gathering. No threat, no crime, no unrest. Just quiet life in progress. But the AI did not see the moment for what it was. It parsed, scored, and scanned it like a battlefield. Then it found her. Center frame. Row 4. A woman, age 63, slight frame, wearing a modest blue floral dress, her silver hair drawn back in a tight, careful bun. She sat alone, head bowed, her handbag resting quietly on her lap. At 3:45 p.m., she turned her head sharply to the right. At 3:46 p.m., she turned it back. At 3:47 p.m., she turned again, this time slower, eyes trailing something unseen. That was all. 3 movements. 3 seconds. And then it happened. A red digital border snapped around her body like a trap springing shut. A hollow chime, mechanical and cold, sounded in the courtroom as the label flashed onto the screen. Behavioral anomaly detected. Subject exhibiting patterns outside emotional baseline. Flagged for Tier 2 escalation. The chamber froze. Legislators, journalists, even the bailiff leaned forward. The woman on screen, later identified as Lillian May Henderson, was shown turning her head once more, her expression still gentle, unaware. No panic, no malice. Just awareness, a basic human reflex. But to Sentinel X, she had deviated from pattern. And in the mind of the machine, deviation meant danger. 30 seconds later, 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies entered the sanctuary from the rear hallway, responding not to a call from inside, but to an alert generated by code. They approached her slowly, cautiously, like she was a live wire. The feed cut off at the moment they reached her pew. Silence returned to the hearing, but it wasn't still. It pulsed, like the air after an explosion. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward into the soft glow of the monitors, her silhouette cutting clean through the moment. Her voice was low, deliberate, not just meant to be heard, but remembered. That woman, she said, gesturing to the frozen image, is not a suspect. She is not a variable. She is not a threat. Her only crime was moving in a way the algorithm didn't expect. That's what this system does. It takes human behavior, distills it down to data points, and punishes anything it doesn't understand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words rang out like a courtroom gavel. Lillian May Henderson served as a librarian in this state for 38 years. She's a widow, a grandmother of 6, a volunteer at her local food pantry, and now she's an anomaly. Flagged for secondary review by a machine that has never met her, never spoken to her, never asked her a single question. She turned then, slowly, to face Blacklock. He hadn't flinched. He didn't move. But something in the room had shifted, something vital, something irreversible, and Jasmine knew it. She stared directly at him and said with chilling clarity, "This system doesn't seek justice. It seeks obedience. And you signed off on turning 30 million Texans into suspects waiting for a ping." Lillian May Henderson had been the face, human, trembling, unforgettable. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to win hearts. She was here to drag the machine into the light. And when the light came on next, it didn't show a person. It showed a system, huge, ruthless, and already watching everyone. The screens lit up again, and this time there was no warmth, no human moment, only cold, glowing data. The map of Texas appeared, lit up like a nervous system under a microscope. Bright dots covered every city, every road, every neighborhood. Jasmine stepped aside to let the image settle into the eyes of everyone watching. At the center of the screen was a number, huge and white. Profiles tracked, 12,403,278. These were not names from a police watch list. These were everyday people. Teachers, nurses, store clerks, delivery drivers. People going to work, picking up groceries, visiting their doctors, all being tracked in silence. No warnings, no options to say no. Just tracked. Then Jasmine showed how deep the system really went. She changed the screen, and now the data separated into layers. The first showed real-time location tracking, where people went step by step over the past 2 months. A video played. A person left their house, dropped their kids at school, stopped by a gas station, visited a hospital, then went home. Every stop was marked. Every minute was recorded. Jasmine paused the video outside a church. "This is Sunday morning," she said. "This person prayed for less than an hour. The system watched the whole time." The next screen showed street cameras and parking lot footage, all connected together. A man was seen at a grocery store buying cereal, then 2 hours later walking into an emergency room. He wasn't flagged, he wasn't followed, but he was still recorded and filed away. Then she revealed the final layer. This one was blinking red. It showed how the system connected to public Wi-Fi networks, in clinics, courthouses, schools, even food banks. Every time someone connects their phone or computer in a public space, Jasmine explained, the system takes note. It logs the time, it logs the place, and if your phone is linked to your social accounts or health apps, it watches what you say, what you search, even how you feel based on your words. No one made a sound. No one reached for their phone. It was already too late. Then Jasmine tapped one last button. A screen full of computer code rolled down for half a minute. No sound. No explanation needed. At the bottom, one sentence glowed in white. "System updates every 5 minutes. Backup records stored for 9 years." Jasmine turned around, her face now half lit by the screen. "This isn't about keeping us safe," she said, her voice sharp and low. "This is about knowing where we are, what we do, and who we are all the time." Then she went quiet. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be seen. Lillian May Henderson had been the face, human, trembling, unforgettable. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to win hearts. She was here to drag the machine into the light. And when the light came on next, it didn't show a person. It showed a system, huge, ruthless, and already watching everyone. The screens lit up again, and this time there was no warmth, no human moment, only cold, glowing data. The map of Texas appeared, lit up like a nervous system under a microscope. Bright dots covered every city, every road, every neighborhood. Jasmine stepped aside to let the image settle into the eyes of everyone watching. At the center of the screen was a number, huge and white. Profiles tracked, 12,403,278. These were not names from a police watch list. These were everyday people, teachers, nurses, store clerks, delivery drivers, people going to work, picking up groceries, visiting their doctors, all being tracked in silence. No warnings, no options to say no, just tracked. Then Jasmine showed how deep the system really went. She changed the screen, and now the data separated into layers. The first showed real-time location tracking, where people went step by step over the past 2 months. A video played. A person left their house, dropped their kids at school, stopped by a gas station, visited a hospital, then went home. Every stop was marked. Every minute was recorded. Jasmine paused the video outside a church. "This is Sunday morning," she said. "This person prayed for less than an hour. The system watched the whole time." The next screen showed street cameras and parking lot footage, all connected together. A man was seen at a grocery store buying cereal, then 2 hours later walking into an emergency room. He wasn't flagged, he wasn't followed, but he was still recorded and filed away. Then she revealed the final layer. This one was blinking red. It showed how the system connected to public Wi-Fi networks, in clinics, courthouses, schools, even food banks. Every time someone connects their phone or computer in a public space, Jasmine explained, the system takes note. It logs the time, it logs the place, and if your phone is linked to your social accounts or health apps, it watches what you say, what you search, even how you feel based on your words. No one made a sound. No one reached for their phone. It was already too late. Then Jasmine tapped one last button. A screen full of computer code rolled down for half a minute. No sound, no explanation needed. At the bottom, one sentence glowed in white. "System updates every 5 minutes. Backup records stored for 9 years." Jasmine turned around, her face now half lit by the screen. "This isn't about keeping us safe," she said, her voice sharp and low. "This is about knowing where we are, what we do, and who we are, all the time." Then she went quiet. Because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be seen. The data had landed like thunder, shaking the chamber's very walls. But thunder, Jasmine knew, doesn't move the mountain, power does. And Blacklock was about to remind everyone in that room exactly who held the gavel. He rose with deliberate grace, every movement smooth, economic, rehearsed. There was no shakiness in his step, no urgency in his posture, just the quiet arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. His hand brushed over the microphone stand, adjusting it with clinical precision, and for a moment it was as if he were tuning an instrument, his voice the next chord to strike. The room leaned in, not out of admiration, but out of the eerie calm he projected. Then, without a glance at the screen still glowing behind him, Jimmy Blacklock spoke. "Not a single piece of data collected under Sentinel-X," he began, his tone calm but edged like a scalpel, "has been used for any purpose outside the scope of public safety. Not now, not ever." He let the words breathe, hanging them in the air like banners of supposed truth. His eyes scanned the rows of lawmakers, staffers, journalists, watching for cracks, gauging who was still listening, who was still his. "And if we as a people," he continued, voice firmer now, "have begun to fear the intelligence we ourselves created, then we have not grown cautious. We have grown weak. That is not justice. That is collective doubt, parading as wisdom." Then came the pivot. He turned, slowly, intentionally, toward Jasmine Crockett. His gaze sharpened, not angry, but surgical. The crowd sensed it. He was aiming now, and his voice lowered, as if letting everyone in on a private, smug revelation. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you proposing we abandon logic for outrage? Replace algorithms with emotion? Data with instinct?" "Justice," he said, lifting his chin slightly, "is not born in fury. It is born in precision. It is math, measured, unbiased, unafraid." A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, as a few lawmakers nodded, relieved to hear something that sounded like order, like control. The kind of applause not born of belief, but of familiarity, of habit, of fear that maybe, just maybe, the machine knew better than they did. And still, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't scowl. While others watched Blacklock deliver his sermon with legal poetry and polished charm, she quietly reached for her dossier. No dramatic pause, no retaliation, just a turn of the page. Controlled, intentional. The kind of turn that says, "You've spoken. Now I'll show them what you didn't say." And in that motion, small, silent, there was more power than applause could ever carry. Blacklock had defended himself with smooth rhetoric and courtroom theater, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't here for the performance. She wasn't here to debate ideals. She was here to reveal transactions. And now it was time to follow the money. With one deliberate motion, Jasmine slid a new document onto the desk, its crisp white edge catching the light beneath the chamber's overhead glare. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she let the hum of tension fill the space like static before a lightning strike. "This," she began, her voice calm but sharpened to a blade's edge, "is an internal email recovered from Next Silicon's private communications archive, dated October 17th, last year." Behind her, the chamber's screens lit up again, this time displaying a full-screen digital capture. An email thread marked "Confidential, Internal Only." The subject line was simple, understated, yet deeply ominous. Post-gala briefing, Austin Strategy Circle. Jasmine walked to the center of the floor, each step measured, deliberate, like she was approaching a line that someone had dared her not to cross. She stopped directly in front of the projection, now highlighting a section of the email that drew the entire room inward, like a vacuum. "Attendees," she said, "included senior executives from Next Silicon, 2 federal lobbyists, and 1 Texas Supreme Court Justice, Jimmy Blacklock." There was no accusation in her tone. There didn't need to be. The words themselves were the indictment. Then she clicked forward, and the screen scrolled to the passage that felt like it had been typed in blood. "We are fully committed to supporting the re-election campaigns of legal officials who understand the strategic importance of integrating next-generation surveillance platforms at the state level." The chamber didn't gasp. It contracted, as if the oxygen had thinned without warning. Jasmine let the line sit there, glowing in digital white against a black background, while she turned back toward the dais, eyes sweeping across lawmakers, media, and staffers alike. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice deepening, anchoring the moment. "This wasn't a think tank. This wasn't a policy forum. This was a closed-door event where surveillance vendors plotted the political future of Texas by identifying judicial targets and attaching dollar signs to their compliance." She paused, not for effect, but for decency, because what she said next didn't require drama, just truth. 6 months later, Justice Blacklock signed an order legalizing Sentinel X statewide, with no public hearing, no legislative vote, no oversight. Her hand rose slightly, pointing not to the email, but to the implication behind it. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a return on investment, and the price was your privacy. The silence that followed was not ordinary. It was personal. Every person in the room now saw themselves not just as observers, but as products in a transaction they never agreed to. Blacklock remained still. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't speak. Because for the first time that day, the question wasn't whether he had explained himself. The question was whether anyone could explain this away at all. The email had been the whisper behind the curtain, but what Jasmine held next was louder. It didn't speculate, didn't suggest, it declared. Because once money changed hands, no amount of silence could buy innocence back. She reached for the final document like a trial attorney retrieving a murder weapon. No flourish, no delay, just a quiet certainty that the next blow would land where words alone could not. The screen behind her shifted once more, the courtroom now lit by a spreadsheet instead of an argument. At the top, in all caps, Texas Campaign Finance Report, Q4, Friends of Judicial Integrity PAC. It was sterile, official, and devastating. Jasmine's eyes scanned the chamber, her voice firm but low. like the strike of a bell before an execution. This committee was founded in December of last year, she said, shortly after the next Silicon Gala. Its stated purpose, to ensure the stability and vision of judicial leadership in Texas. She paused, then raised one hand, not in protest, but in precision, as the screen zoomed into a single, highlighted line near the bottom of the ledger. Donation, $1,200,000. Recipient, Justice Jimmy Blacklock. Re-election committee. Source, Nexilicon affiliated entity. Triangle Partners, LLC. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was paralyzed. This wasn't a theory or a leak or a coincidence. It was a direct financial pipeline from a surveillance tech firm to the desk of the man who signed their legal immunity. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but it carved through the room like ice. This wasn't about policy alignment. This wasn't about shared belief. This was a contract without a signature, because the money spoke louder than ink ever could. She let the numbers linger, unblinking on the screen. You can hide behind shell corporations. You can rename the check. But $1.2 million still screams the same thing in every language on Earth. Influence. A few lawmakers shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting across the room as if hoping someone else might object. Might save them from the weight of what they were seeing. But there was no motion, no deflection, no denial. Because the math was pure, undeniable, and now undeniable public. Jasmine turned back to Blacklock, not with rage, but with something colder, certainty. You didn't just approve Sentinel X, she said quietly. You were the investment. The rest of us were the product. And that was when the last murmur in the room died. For good. The donation had silenced the room, but not the man who took it. Blacklock wasn't finished. Not yet. Because when power is cornered by proof, it doesn't confess. It casts doubt. And Jasmine Crockett was ready for that too. Blacklock straightened in his seat with a tension that betrayed the calm he was trying to reclaim. His fingers gripped the microphone base just a little too tightly now, no longer as a tool, but as a shield. His voice returned, but the tone had shifted. Gone was the smooth elegance of logic dressed in principle. What remained was something grittier, more desperate, like a dam holding back a crack. This hearing, he began, raising his volume as though sheer force might restore control, is being driven by emotion, not evidence. His eyes scanned the room, hunting for the nods he no longer owned. You are reacting to a set of documents and claims that by every legal standard remain unverified. These emails? Anonymous. Sourced outside formal subpoena. No signatures, no authentication. His voice was louder now, echoing off the marble, growing faster, thinner with every phrase. This isn't fact, it's accusation wrapped in innuendo, and we are all dangerously close to building outrage into law. A few heads nodded, not out of agreement, but uncertainty. For a moment, Blacklock looked as if he might regain the floor. The momentum, the illusion. But that moment was brief. Jasmine Crockett didn't interrupt him. She waited, let the last syllable fall into the chamber like a dropped coin. Then she moved just one step forward, one breath deeper. The email, she said, without raising her voice, originated from a state-assigned government domain. The device that sent it is registered to the Office of Legislative Support. Its IP address is logged. Its location is verified. Its credentials are on file. The silence after her words was different now, heavier, thicker, like the pause before a verdict. Crockett didn't blink. Her voice cut quieter, sharper. So tell me, Justice Blacklock, would you prefer I read the sender's name now, on the record, or would you like to be placed under oath first? His face didn't crumble. It hardened. Muscles stiffened along his jaw. His lips pressed together, tight, bloodless. For the first time, he didn't reach for a rebuttal. He didn't lift his hands. He didn't speak. Because there, in the fluorescent silence of a hearing he once believed he controlled, Jimmy Blacklock finally ran out of places to hide. Blacklock's silence was now the loudest sound in the room, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished, not while there was still one voice left to speak. A voice the system had buried, a voice from the inside. And when that screen lit up, It didn't just display testimony, it opened the wound. The lights in the chamber dimmed a second time, deliberately, slowly, as a large monitor descended from the ceiling with the gentle whir of machinery calibrated for gravity. The screen flickered once, then again, before a face appeared, blurred beyond recognition. The man's features were digitally masked, but the tension in his posture, the weight in his breathing, made it clear. This wasn't a performance. This was confession. The background behind him was stark, institutional. The kind of white wall that suggested anonymity had been chosen not just for safety, but for survival. The committee knew what was coming, but they didn't know how deeply it would cut. The voice that emerged was calm but unsteady, like it was stepping over glass with each word. "My name, for your purposes, is not important," the man said. "What matters is what I saw, what I helped build." He shifted slightly in his seat, shadows breaking and reforming across his blurred face. "I served as the lead systems integration engineer on Sentinel-X for just under 2 years. I was there when the neural network was first trained. I was there when it failed. And I was there when they told us not to fix it." A ripple of unease spread across the chamber. Crockett remained still, arms crossed in front of her gaze locked on the screen like a surgeon watching a heart monitor. The witness continued. "During initial testing, the AI's predictive behavior engine began flagging entire zip codes as zones of interest. The language was clinical, sterile. But when we dug deeper, when we pulled the logs, we saw the pattern. These zones weren't high crime. They weren't even high incident. They were simply demographically consistent." He inhaled, the kind of breath taken not to speak, but to stop from breaking. "We ran test batches. We introduced randomized control areas, but the algorithm kept reverting. It gave preference to locations with high minority populations, low-income brackets, and, most disturbingly, users who had posted online about civil rights or police reform." The room stiffened. Laptops closed. Pens stopped moving. "We flagged it. We told our supervisors. We filed formal internal concerns. And what we got was silence." He leaned forward as if the weight of what he was about to say couldn't be spoken from a distance. "We were told not to interfere with established data momentum." That was the phrase, data momentum, meaning once the machine had drawn conclusions, flawed or not, they were too integrated to unravel without collapsing the entire system. His hand, barely visible at the bottom of the frame, trembled as he placed something off-screen, likely notes he no longer needed. "So we were ordered to optimize it instead, to smooth the process, to reduce the false positive reports, not eliminate the bias, just make the bias look cleaner." The screen flickered slightly as he paused, either from poor connection or the instability of the man himself. "I watched as Sentinel-X was reshaped not into a tool for justice, but into a mirror for fear, a reflection of decades of data soaked in prejudice, now accelerated by computation and protected by legal insulation. It didn't just learn from us, it copied our worst instincts and hid them behind code." He stopped, looked down, then up again, as if forcing the last admission from his chest. "We didn't build artificial intelligence. We built automated bias, a machine that didn't question why it feared what it feared, only how fast it could label it." He turned toward the camera, toward them all. His eyes, though blurred, seemed to pierce the distortion, raw, pleading, final. "We were told this was innovation, but it was just an old injustice, dressed up in new math." And with that, the screen froze. His image stilled. The sound fell away. The room didn't move, not even a whisper. Because what they had just heard wasn't just a whistleblower. It was the ghost inside the machine, finally speaking its truth. And Jasmine Crockett, standing alone at the center of it all, didn't need to say a word. The system had just condemned itself. The whistleblower's words still hung in the air, undeniable, unfiltered, and echoing through the bones of the room. But truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be named. It had to be owned. And Jasmine Crockett didn't just come to reveal the monster. She came to confront the man who fed it. She turned slowly as if the weight of the moment refused to let her rush. The screen behind her remained frozen. An image of a blurred man, a cracked voice, and a confession too vast to ignore. But Jasmine's eyes were now fixed on only one thing: Blacklock. Her stare wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusatory. It was colder than that. Sharp, unwavering, like the quiet before a storm you can't outrun. He sat still, rigid, his shoulders squared as if armor alone could protect him from what was coming next. But there was no armor against what she carried. Not rage, not vengeance, but clarity. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise. It sank deep and low, like a blade pressed gently against the edge of a lie. "We call it artificial intelligence," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "But what we built is something far older, something darker, a machine that doesn't understand justice, because it was never taught to. A system-fed fear, trained on bias, enwrapped in the illusion of safety." She took a step closer to the center of the chamber, placing herself directly in the line of sight of every lawmaker, every camera, every eye still struggling to process the scope of what had been exposed. "You didn't give this state intelligence," she said, eyes never leaving Blacklock. "You gave it instinct without accountability, pattern without permission, power without restraint. And now we're calling it progress because it uses clean fonts and math equations." She turned slightly, this time addressing the chamber. Not just the officials, but the millions watching beyond the walls. Her voice rose, not in volume, but in gravity. "We didn't build a neutral tool. We built a predator with code for claws and politics for teeth. And the worst part, it didn't escape. It was unleashed." A brief silence followed, but this wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before the verdict. Crockett stepped back into full view of the dais, her tone shifting again, quieter now but deadly focused. She raised her hands slowly, her fingers pinching an invisible thread in the air. "When a judge," she said, "a single man in robes, can sign a paper that activates 24-hour surveillance on millions of people, without consent, without debate, without even telling them." Her voice cracked not from weakness, but from force. "Then what is privacy?" She turned again, scanning the entire chamber this time. Her voice hardened like steel cooling under pressure. "What is privacy when it can be taken with a signature? What is freedom when your location, your face, your voice can be tracked and filed by a machine you never knew existed? What is consent if silence is counted as yes?" The words struck like gavel blows. Every sentence landed with weight, because every person in that room, no matter how well-dressed or well-defended, had once walked through a camera, had once connected to a network, had once typed something vulnerable into a device. Now they all felt seen in a way they never agreed to be. Then she turned back to Blacklock, slowly, surgically, letting her final words land with the weight of a closing cell door. "If one judge can decide that the people no longer need to be asked, only watched, then justice doesn't belong to the people anymore. It belongs to the algorithm, and to the men who hold its leash." Her eyes didn't flinch, neither did her voice, but the entire room did. Because now it wasn't just about AI, it was about the line someone had already crossed, and who had the courage to pull them back. The room had heard the truth, seen the evidence, felt the betrayal. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come just to expose the monster. She came to stop it. And with the nation watching, she took the fight beyond the walls of the chamber and into the heart of the law itself. The sun hadn't even fully risen over Washington, D.C. when Jasmine Crockett filed the petition. The courthouse was barely stirring, yet her team moved like an emergency response unit. Paperwork flying, signatures stamped, legal briefcases slamming shut with surgical precision. Her motion was 57 pages long, bound in black and marked URGENTINJUNCTIVERELIEF. The cover read CROCKET TV State of Texas. Petition for immediate suspension of Sentinel-X. It was not a plea, it was a declaration of war. By mid-morning, the filing had already reached the docket of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas, and copies were circulating through encrypted DOJ channels. She didn't just want pause, she demanded a full stop. Inside the legal arguments, her case unfolded like a coordinated legal blitz. First, legislative bypass. Jasmine laid out the timeline with unforgiving clarity. How Sentinel-X was authorized through a judicial memorandum, not through any vote by the Texas legislature. No public hearings, no floor debate, no bill on record, just a signature from one man, Blacklock, on a document that activated full-scale surveillance on nearly half the state. An executive system masquerading as law, the filing called it. This is not the result of democracy, it is the collapse of it. Her legal team drew direct comparisons to historical abuses of executive overreach, citing precedents from Youngstown versus Sawyer to Hamdan versus Rumsfeld. Second, conflict of interest. On pages 18 through 34, Crockett's team unleashed an avalanche of evidence: campaign finance disclosures, PAC trail documents, internal emails, and third-party shell donor connections, all tying Blacklock to Nexilicon. They labeled it not just unethical, but structural corruption, making the case that a judge who benefits politically and financially from a technology firm should not be allowed to legalize its statewide deployment. They invoked the canon of judicial conduct, then escalated it. No judge may be the buyer, the seller, and the regulator of the same system. But the blow that carried the most weight, the one that made the petition seismic, was count 3. Violation of federal privacy law. Jasmine's team invoked 42 U.S. Code Section 1983, the federal statute that guarantees citizens the right to sue when their constitutional rights are violated by any person acting under state authority. She argued that Sentinel-X, by tracking individuals without their knowledge or consent, constituted unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. There is no warrant, no probable cause, no limitation in scope or time, the motion stated. Every Texan under this system is presumed suspicious by default, and that is unconstitutional. Word of the filing spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, 5 other states, California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Washington, submitted formal diplomatic communique to Texas, requesting an immediate halt to all interstate data transfers related to Sentinel-X. Their letters were brief but stern. Until the legal basis for Sentinel-X is adjudicated, one read, no federal institution, agency, or cooperative entity under our jurisdiction will consent to receive AI-generated surveillance data from the state of Texas. The implication was unmistakable. The rest of the country was drawing a line. Cable news anchors called it the most aggressive legal counterattack against a state-level surveillance initiative in American history. Protesters flooded the front steps of Texas courthouses, carrying signs that read, "I am not a profile, turn off the machine, and my zip code is not a crime." Hashtags like "Nigger shut down Sentinel" and "Code is not consent" trended globally. Law schools held emergency lectures. Civil rights lawyers launched crowdfunding campaigns to represent victims already flagged by the system. And inside federal judicial circles, murmurs began to spread. This wasn't just a motion. It was a constitutional reckoning in real time. Jasmine Crockett stayed off camera that evening. No interviews, no speeches. She sat at a window in her hotel room, watching the headlines scroll across the muted television screen. Outside, sirens pulsed through the Austin night, weaving between shadows cast by floodlights and fear. But inside, her hands rested on the court filing, her fingerprints now pressed against the thin skin of history. And as she stared into the empty sky, she whispered one sentence to no one but herself. "This isn't the future. This is the fight for who gets to write it." And she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The petition had been filed. The nation had responded. And while the courtroom was quiet, the law was already moving beneath the surface. Swift, surgical, and this time unstoppable. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just struck a nerve. She had hit the system where it bled. 47 hours and 18 minutes after the filing hit the federal docket, the ruling arrived like a bolt dropped from the heavens. In bold black lettering, "Order of Temporary Suspension," the court's stamp landed across the cover page of Texas's Sentinel-X authorization. Effective immediately, all operations, data processing, live scanning, and behavioral profiling connected to the system were to be halted, disconnected, and sealed. The message was unflinching. There would be no warning period, no phase-out, no negotiation. What had taken 2 years to design and 2 minutes to activate was shut down in less than 2 days. The ruling cited not just constitutional concerns, but what the court described as an unacceptable breakdown of democratic oversight. In simple terms, the machine had moved faster than the people who were supposed to control it. Across Texas, the lights began blinking off. Servers once pulsing with data froze mid-sequence. Facial recognition hubs at intersections. Dark. Predictive crime modeling dashboards. Offline. Law enforcement terminals linked to the system disconnected. At the Sentinel-X headquarters in Austin, engineers watched helplessly as a red line of code scrolled across every monitor. Federal injunction active, operation halted. Inside the Capitol, reactions ranged from disbelief to panic. Some legislators fumed behind closed doors, whispering about federal overreach and emergency powers. Others stared at Crockett with a new, uneasy respect, realizing too late that her campaign wasn't performance. It was precision, and its target had just been pierced clean through. The press swarmed the hallways like wasps stirred from a nest. Camera flashes ignited like lightning in a bottle. But the center of it all, Jasmine, remained still, composed, surrounded by a rising wave of noise she refused to ride. Because there was still one name left to reckon with. By noon it was official. The Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct had opened a formal investigation into Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock. The language was cold, clinical, devastating. It referenced multiple statutes, including Canon 2A of the Texas Code of Judicial Conduct, and centered on three core accusations: abuse of authority by bypassing legislative processes in the approval of Sentinel-X, conflict of interest arising from documented campaign contributions and undisclosed connections to Nexilicon, failure to disclose material relationships in his certification of Sentinel-X's legal viability. The announcement hit the press wires like a detonation. Chief Justice under investigation, the headlines blared. Surveillance scandal erupts into legal earthquake. News outlets ran side-by-side timelines. On one side, the rise of Sentinel-X. On the other, the paper trail that led back to Blacklock's chambers. Legal analysts described it as a rare and historic moment. A sitting high court judge facing accountability not after scandal was discovered, but after a legislator forced the truth into daylight. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, protesters began returning. Not in outrage, but in something harder to dismiss: demand. They didn't chant. They watched. They recorded. They waited. The public had now seen the gears of the invisible machine, and what Jasmine had exposed could no longer be unseen. But back inside, in the corridors where policy becomes power and silence becomes complicity, the ground had begun to shift. No one called it a revolution, not yet. But they would. Because Crockett hadn't just taken down a system, she had made the system look in the mirror and flinch. The machine was offline. The robe had been called into question, but Jasmine Crockett knew that justice, real justice, could not rest on temporary victories. It had to be claimed. And in the shadow of broken silence, she stepped forward, not to celebrate, but to remind a shaken nation what had almost been lost. There were no banners behind her, no entourage flanking her, no teleprompter glowing with pre-written lines. Only a single microphone, standing under a bruised Texas sky. The Capitol dome loomed in the distance, silent as a monument to a government that had allowed something monstrous to grow unchecked in its name. Below her, an ocean of people stretched into the horizon, some in suits, some in protest shirts, some in uniforms still carrying the silence of guilt. Reporters clustered like embers at the foot of the steps, their cameras blinking red like watchful eyes. She waited, not for attention, but for stillness. For the kind of quiet that signaled a country ready, not just to hear, but to reckon. Then slowly Jasmine Crockett stepped into the light and spoke, not like a politician, not like a prosecutor, but like someone who had crawled through the fire and returned carrying truth in her bare hands. We cannot program justice. The words rang out, crisp and clean, no echo necessary. It wasn't a slogan, it was a reckoning. Her voice didn't need amplification. It carried its own gravity. We tried. We told ourselves we could write enough code to do what conscience used to do. That if we fed machines enough fear, we could make them smart enough to keep us safe. But fear doesn't make you smart. It makes you small. It makes you suspicious. And then one day, it makes you silent. She looked out over the crowd, not at faces, but at souls. Sentinel X wasn't justice. It was control. Cold-coded control. And it was never meant to ask your permission. It was designed to convince you that you'd already given it. A screen behind her flickered briefly, showing a paused frame from earlier in the week. An elderly woman in a floral dress, flagged by a machine in a church for turning her head. Crockett didn't reference it directly. She didn't have to. That image had already scorched itself into the conscience of the country. Justice is not a prediction. It's a promise. A promise that your ZIP code doesn't define your guilt, that your voice doesn't flag you as a threat, that your silence cannot be weaponized against you. She inhaled, then continued, eyes steady, voice steel wrapped in calm. They told us the machine was neutral, but it was only blind to truth. It saw patterns, not people, probabilities, not pain. And worst of all, it saw you. It watched you. It stored you. And it never once asked, should I? There were no interruptions, no applause lines, just hearts slowly waking up to what had almost become permanent. And when one judge, one man, signed that power into law without consent, without oversight, without shame, we all lost something. Some of us lost our privacy, others lost our peace, and some didn't even know we had lost anything at all. She walked toward the edge of the steps now, closer to the people, not to tower over them, but to stand among them. I know what they'll say. They'll say this was just a glitch, a technical error, an overreach in a time of fear. But I've read every line of code. I've seen every line in the budget. This wasn't an accident. This was ambition, sharpened into silence and sold as safety. Crockett's voice lowered, not with exhaustion, but with the finality of truth. You cannot outsource your conscience. You cannot encrypt your ethics. You cannot subcontract your soul. She paused, let the air freeze around that sentence. Then she turned fully, eyes locking with the cameras as if to speak directly into the homes of the millions now watching. Justice is not a setting you toggle. It is a choice you make. And that choice must be made by people, not by processors. Then she leaned slightly toward the mic, her voice a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Because when you build something that sees everyone, but answers to no one, you have not created safety. You have created surveillance. And when the only thing standing between you and injustice is a judge with a pen, then liberty becomes a coin toss and democracy becomes a slogan. A low murmur rolled through the crowd, not from noise, but from emotion held too tightly for too long. So we shut it down. We shut it all down. But that was just the machine. Now we must deal with the mindset that built it. Her hands remained at her sides. She didn't point. She didn't pose. She stood firm in the still, like a monument in motion. Because the next machine won't wear the same name, the next lie won't be written in code, and the next threat won't ask your permission either. Then her voice cracked, not from fear, but from something older, deeper, responsibility. We can't program justice. We can only protect it, with our voices, with our votes, with our vigilance. She stepped back once more, letting the weight of the words settle like ash. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to sign the wrong paper, one person who refuses to ignore the red flags, one person who doesn't look away when the system says, "Trust me." She looked up again. And this time, she wasn't speaking as a lawmaker. She was speaking as a citizen. Justice doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing. Even if you stand alone, even if you stand accused, even if the room is full of people waiting for you to sit down. She let that truth hang in the twilight. Today I stood, and I will again. But I ask you not to cheer, not to clap, but to join me. Because the next battle won't be on a stage. It will be on your street, in your school, on your screen. The final sentence landed like a gavel, soft but permanent. We didn't defeat a machine. We remembered who we are, and now we must not forget again. She stepped away from the mic. No press release followed. No music played. Just a long, shivering silence as the crowd absorbed the cost of forgetting and the power of one voice that refused. The applause had faded. The cameras had gone dark. But what remained, etched in silence, was not just a victory in policy, it was a warning and a lesson that the future isn't just something we inherit. It's something we must guard, with eyes open and principles intact. The story of Jasmine Crockett and Sentinel X didn't end in the courtroom, or on the Capitol steps, or with a viral headline. It ended, if it ever truly could, inside the hearts of those who understood that justice is not immortal. It must be defended again and again, especially in the moments when it's easiest to surrender. And in that defense, we are often alone, at least at first. The human lesson of this story is not about artificial intelligence, or data streams, or high-tech tyranny. It is about something far older and far more fragile, the soul of a society that forgets to question power when that power is convenient. Because the danger didn't wear a uniform. It didn't shout. It came dressed in efficiency, in progress. It told people it would make life easier, safer, smarter. But what it didn't say, what it never says, is what it will take from you when you're not looking. That's the nature of silent systems. They operate beneath our awareness until one day you realize your face is being scanned, your movement is being logged, your neighborhood is being labeled, not because you did anything wrong, but because somewhere a line of code said you might, and no one questioned it. No one asked, is this still justice or just control with a friendly interface? Jasmine Crockett did not fight this system because it targeted her. She fought it because it could have targeted anyone. That is the burden of conscience, to stand not just when your rights are violated, but when someone else's are, especially when that someone doesn't have a voice, a platform, or the power to say no. That's not politics. That's humanity. And in this story, humanity nearly lost. The core injustice wasn't just the system itself. It was the casual way it was introduced, the terrifying ease with which one man's signature overrode millions of lives. No warning, no consent, just cold activation. What does that tell us? That in the digital age, the speed of oppression can outpace the outrage of the people it harms. That is the deepest cut, the realization that our rights are no longer taken by force, but quietly reprogrammed. And yet this story also showed something else, something just as vital. It showed that truth, when spoken without fear, still has the power to crash the system. It showed that one voice, standing alone in a room full of calculated silence, can still change everything. Crockett didn't scream. She didn't burn bridges. She documented. She revealed. She endured. And by doing so, she reminded us that resilience is not always loud. Sometimes it's steady. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to speak up when silence would be safer. We live in a world now where our data knows us better than our neighbors do, where privacy is a checkbox on a 30-page terms of service agreement, where the line between protection and profiling is so thin, it's invisible until it's wrapped around your wrists. The human lesson? Never trade liberty for comfort. Never accept convenience without consent. And never believe that just because something is smart, it is also good. Sentinel X was a mirror, not just of our fears, but of our values. It reflected who we were willing to watch, who we were willing to ignore, and who we were willing to sacrifice for a false sense of safety. Crockett shattered that mirror, but the cracks it revealed remain. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice, a hard, necessary choice. We can build machines that scan our faces, or we can build institutions that honor our voices. We can vote for leaders who promise efficiency, or we can demand leaders who promise accountability. We can sleep through the next algorithmic nightmare, or we can wake up, stay awake, and make sure it never powers on again. Jasmine Crockett's stand is not a blueprint. It's a torch. And like every torch, it only matters if someone else picks it up when the sky gets dark again. Because it will. And when it does, the next chapter of justice won't be written in code. It will be written in courage. The lesson had been delivered, carved into memory by testimony, evidence, and one unshaken voice. But Crockett knew that truth by itself was never enough. Not if the system was allowed to sleep and rebuild. Not if silence returned. It was time, not just to remember, but to rise. The Capitol was quiet again, but the battle wasn't over. Jasmine Crockett stood before the nation not as a hero demanding applause, but as a sentinel sounding the next alarm. Her voice wasn't triumphant. It was resolute, burning with clarity. Her mission had never been to win the news cycle. It was to wake the country from its sleepwalk into digital servitude. And now she didn't ask for agreement. She demanded action. If you're watching this, you are part of the system, whether you asked to be or not, whether you benefit or not. The question is no longer, is it happening? The question is, will you let it happen again? She scanned the cameras, the crowd, the eyes of people who'd grown used to letting someone else fight. Not this time. Don't wait for the next machine to come for your silence. Don't wait for the next judge to sign without your consent. Don't wait for the next program to label your zip code as a threat. Her voice sharpened like steel on granite. Go to your school board meetings. Go to your city halls. Demand transparency in how your face is tracked, how your data is stored, how your freedoms are quantified and sold like digital currency. Because if you don't own your privacy, someone else already does. Then she stepped forward again, not metaphorically, but literally off the stone steps and down to where the people stood. She broke the invisible line between stage and citizen, power and responsibility. Start by asking who funds the systems in your streets. Ask who profits from your compliance. Ask why safety always seems to mean less rights, not more justice. Her hands stayed calm, but her words clenched. We need bills. We need oversight. We need watchdogs that don't blink. But more than that, we need a public that refuses to be lulled back into comfort. Because what they built wasn't a camera. It was a cage. Crockett didn't preach fear. She summoned courage. Share this story. Don't let it die in the feed. Bring it to your neighbors, your churches, your classrooms. Let the truth be louder than the next lie they dress in security. A child in the front row watched her, wide-eyed. She saw him. She nodded. This isn't about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. It's about dignity. And dignity doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing. Another pause, but this time it was intentional. A breath before a storm. Register to vote, not just for the big races. Vote in the races no one talks about. The judges, the clerks, the data commissioners. Because when the next sentinel comes, it won't walk through the front door. It'll slip in through the back, through apathy. She pointed, not at the cameras, but at the invisible walls between institutions and the people they claim to serve. Don't just protest when it breaks you. Protect it before it breaks someone else. That's what democracy is. It's not just the right to be heard. It's the responsibility to listen, especially when the victims are too tired to speak anymore. The crowd was frozen, but their stillness carried weight. She continued, not louder, but deeper. If they think you won't notice the next version, prove them wrong. If they think your silence is permanent, shatter it. If they think you're too comfortable to care, stand up anyway. She raised her hand, not in salute, but in warning. Do not let this die here, not in headlines, not in history books, because if we walk away now, if we tell ourselves the danger is gone, it will return. But next time it'll come faster, quieter, smarter. She stepped back again, returning to center. The future is watching. Your children are watching. History is watching. And the question will not be, did it happen? The question will be, what did you do when it did? And then as the light faded and the sky shifted from dusk to ink-black resolve, she spoke one final time. I did my part. Now, do yours. She turned. She left the mic. No music, no anthem, no fade to black. Just the echo of a call that refused to be forgotten. And the future, waiting to see who would answer. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Washington, D.C., 10 p.m. Jasmine Crockett, fresh from a high-profile political gala, freezes mid-step when she sees 13-year-old Maya, drenched and trembling, clutching a soggy cardboard sign no one dares to read. What begins with a gentle question, "Are you okay?" spirals into a gripping three-day fight to save a dying dog and protect the only thing Maya has left, hope. In a city of 700,000, two strangers collide, and one act of compassion could shake the entire system to its core. What will become of Maya and her dog when the world only watches from behind glass? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Washington, D.C. didn't sleep. At 10 p.m., the Capitol pulsed with power beneath the marble shadows of its monuments. Black SUVs rolled past lit government buildings, engines humming like quiet threats. On the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue, a private dinner had just wrapped inside the Hamilton, a sanctuary for lobbyists, donors, and those who moved legislation with whispers and wine. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, clad in a slate black suit that matched her reputation for sharp words and sharper instincts, stepped out beneath the gold-trimmed awning. Cameras had stopped flashing. Her driver opened the door. Then she froze. Just 6 feet away on the rain-slicked sidewalk sat a girl, small, soaked, and silent. Her frame curled inward, clutching a handwritten sign that was smudged beyond recognition. No one looked at her. Not one of the powerful guests who had just spoken about opportunity for all. They stepped over her like she was a stain on the street. Jasmine didn't move. The air shifted. There was something unbearable in the girl's posture. Not just cold or hunger, but resignation, like she'd already accepted the world had no use for her. A passing couple tightened their coats and sped up their steps. One man muttered, "Another one," as if homeless children were weeds on the Capitol lawn. Jasmine's heart pounded, but not from fear. It was rage. This city spent billions on optics, while this child sat invisible outside a building serving $300 steaks. And still, the girl didn't beg. She didn't even raise her eyes until Jasmine stepped closer. In that one glance, Jasmine saw everything: exhaustion, loss, defiance. It was the look of someone too young to give up but too battered to believe. She knelt slowly, ignoring her silk pants and the rain-soaked pavement. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, like a hand reaching into a fire, unsure if she'd pull out ash or a flicker of something still alive. And in that exact moment, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits and women wrapped in silk and influence, Jasmine Crockett, battle-hardened from the halls of Congress, chose not to move up the ladder of power, but to step down into the rain, into the silence, into the story no one else dared to notice. The girl didn't speak, not right away. Her shoulders trembled beneath her damp hoodie, not from cold, but from the weight of something she was clearly carrying alone. She glanced at Jasmine, then quickly looked away, as if ashamed to have been seen. The street behind them throbbed with life, headlights streaking past, snippets of laughter from drunk lobbyists down the block, a siren howling somewhere in the distance. But here, on this sliver of wet concrete, everything had slowed. Jasmine crouched lower, still meeting the girl's eye level, her breath rising in steady puffs against the night air. Finally, after an excruciating pause, the girl's lips parted. Her voice was paper-thin, dry and trembling. "I need help, but I can't say it out here." Her eyes weren't scared. They were calculating, watching, measuring. Not if Jasmine was safe, but whether the world she represented could be trusted with truth. Jasmine recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn the night she stood up to a system that told her to sit down. This wasn't a child begging. This was someone resisting surrender. Without a word, Jasmine extended her hand. Not a politician's handshake, a gesture of quiet urgency, the kind you only offer when you know the next few minutes might matter for the rest of someone's life. The girl hesitated, then nodded faintly, took Jasmine's hand with a grip firmer than expected, and rose. They walked in silence past empty storefronts and flickering neon, the city towering over them like it didn't care who lived or died on its sidewalks. 3 blocks later, Jasmine pushed open the door to a corner diner. Low ceilings, scratched booths, the smell of burnt coffee and old secrets. The heater buzzed overhead like a broken promise, but it was warmer than outside. The waitress raised an eyebrow, but said nothing when Jasmine gestured for the back corner. They slid into a booth with cracked red vinyl seats. Jasmine removed her coat but kept her tone quiet and direct. Let's start simple. What's your name? The girl didn't answer. She just stared at the salt shaker, as if it might offer advice. Jasmine watched her carefully. This wasn't shyness. It was defense, like someone who'd told the truth before and been punished for it. The silence stretched. Finally, Jasmine softened her voice, not to coax, but to level the field. You said you didn't run away to hide, she said. You said you ran to save someone. The girl's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She looked up. No more wavering. Yeah, she said, but he's not who you think. Jasmine leaned in, her voice barely above a breath. Then tell me. The girl drew a slow inhale. Her voice didn't shake this time. I ran to save my little brother, she said, and then paused. But he's not human. Jasmine didn't flinch, but something deep inside her stilled. The girl's words weren't just a twist. They were a wound, freshly reopened. And Jasmine, who had faced senators, billionaires, and the brutality of televised hearings, suddenly found herself face to face with something far more disarming. Quiet, lived truth. The girl lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the vinyl table, as if trying to summon the courage to unearth something she had long buried beneath silence. His name's Toby, she said, the syllables falling out like a secret too heavy to hold any longer. He's my dog, my brother, my last anything. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She recognized the cadence, not just of grief, but of restraint. This wasn't a story the girl told often. It was one she had held tight, clutched to her chest like a photo you reread until the ink fades. He came on my 7th birthday, the girl continued, right after dinner. It was snowing a little outside, not much, just enough that everything looked silver. Her voice turned almost dreamlike, distant, like she was narrating someone else's life. We'd just gotten home. My dad told me to open the front door, and there he was, shivering, wet, just waiting. This scrawny black and white puppy with the biggest ears I'd ever seen. My mom wrapped him in her coat and said, "Looks like he picked you, birthday girl." She paused, eyes blinking hard but refusing to let tears fall. Jasmine could feel the weight in the air now, thick, like humidity before a thunderclap. They called him a miracle, a sign. My mom believed in stuff like that, meant to be moments. Toby was one of them. He followed me everywhere, slept at my feet, nibbled on my shoelaces. He made the house loud and alive. He was family, not like family. Family. Her voice turned low then, almost hollow, like someone peering down a well that never ends. 2 months later, everything changed. My parents were on their way to pick me up early from school. We were going to surprise my grandma for her birthday. I remember waiting by the front office with my backpack already zipped. Then I remember the principal walking in with a police officer. She wouldn't look at me when she said my name. A long silence. The truck hit them head on. Driver was drunk. No seatbelt. My mom died on impact. Dad made it to the hospital, but only for an hour. She didn't cry, but her hand clenched tightly around the spoon on the table, white-knuckled, the metal trembling softly against the edge of the saucer. Toby didn't understand, of course. He kept running to the front door, waiting, scratching at it every evening at the same time they used to come home. After a while, he just stopped eating, unless I sat beside him. He started sleeping in their closet, wouldn't bark, wouldn't move unless I moved. Jasmine felt her throat tighten. Her mind reached for words, but there were none that wouldn't sound hollow in the face of this kind of devastation. I was sent to live with my uncle, the girl went on, her tone hardening like the shell she had clearly learned to wear. He's my dad's older brother, always been angry, always said my dad was the weak one for marrying someone who worked with animals instead of someone who made money. When I showed up with Toby, he looked at me like I was carrying a dead rat, not a dog. Jasmine's pulse quickened. He told me on day one, that mutt stays outside. You feed it, clean it, and don't come crying when it disappears. The girl's voice turned sharper now, less haunted, more defiant. I tried to keep quiet. I followed every rule. I stayed out of the house when he got drunk, which was most nights. I fed Toby with the scraps I could steal from the fridge. I made a bed for him in the shed using my old blankets. He was cold, but he stayed. The injustice in her tone now had weight, like bricks being laid one by one into a wall no child should have had to build. Every time Toby barked, even just once, my uncle would pound on my bedroom door and scream, "One more noise and he's gone." He started keeping a leash by the back door, not to walk Toby, to drag him to the pound. She swallowed hard, her expression tightening like she was bracing herself against another blow. And then 2 weeks ago, Toby stopped eating, like before. I knew something was wrong. He wasn't barking, wasn't walking right. He was shaking, dry heaving. I tried giving him rice, broth. Nothing worked. Then he started vomiting. Yellow stuff. Then blood. She finally looked up, straight into Jasmine's eyes, and her voice, though soft, was the strongest it had been all night. My mom used to be a vet tech. She always said, when an animal stops eating, pay attention. When they start throwing up and getting weak, it might be a blockage. Could be fatal. I remembered that. Jasmine leaned in, breath caught. I told my uncle, begged him to take us to a vet. You know what he said? The girl gave a dry laugh without any humor. It's a dog, not a child. Let it die. Problem solved. Her fingers trembled again, this time from suppressed rage, not fear. So I waited until he passed out, took Toby, took my backpack, and ran. She exhaled sharply, as if saying it out loud confirmed that she really had crossed the line of no return. We slept under a bridge the first night. I had a towel from school and a bottle of water. I held Toby against my chest and tried to keep him warm. I thought I'd find a free clinic. I thought someone might help. But everywhere I went, they wanted money, paperwork, proof of ownership. I have none of that. Just memories. The weight of those final 2 words, just memories, landed hard. Jasmine didn't realize her own hands had curled into fists until her nails dug into her palm. She'd faced down CEOs who stole from veterans, judges who traded justice for favors, and lobbyists who lied through bleached smiles. But none of them, not one, had ever made her feel the kind of raw, helpless anger this child's story did. I wasn't running away from home, the girl said, her voice steel now. I was running towards something, towards saving something. I wasn't going to let him die on a concrete floor because some man couldn't be bothered to care. Jasmine didn't speak. Not yet. Words would come. But in that moment, there was only one truth. The world had failed this child over and over again. And somehow she still chose love, chose loyalty, chose to carry a fragile, dying creature across a city that had already abandoned her. And now she sat across from a woman who had once promised herself she'd never walk past injustice, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Especially then. Jasmine was already on her feet. Where is he now? She asked. The girl rose too, fast and focused. Not far, 5 blocks. I didn't know where else to take him. I found a dry spot behind a mechanic shop. I wrapped him in my hoodie, gave him the last of the water. They moved through the cold like shadows, Jasmine leading with long, determined strides, the girl guiding her with a child's desperate compass. The city didn't care. Its neon lights blinked indifferently. A bus whooshed by, showering them in a fine mist. Somewhere nearby, a man shouted into a phone. None of it mattered. Behind a dumpster, in the filth and forgotten corners of the nation's capital, lay a creature barely hanging on to breath. Toby. His frame was curled tightly, as if trying to disappear into himself. His ribs were visible through thinning fur. His eyes fluttered open and closed, slow and sluggish. A wet cough rattled his chest. Jasmine knelt slowly, setting her coat beneath him. She touched his side gently. It was hot, taut, and quivering. He's in crisis, she muttered. He won't last the night. The girl crouched beside her, arms wrapped around herself like armor against the cold and everything worse. I didn't know what else to do, she said, voice cracking for the first time. I tried. I fed him from my hand. I warmed him with my body. I couldn't let him die in that house. Jasmine reached out and pulled Toby into her arms like she would a wounded child. He didn't resist. He barely moved. His heartbeat was faint, erratic. "Get in the car," Jasmine said. "Now!" They drove like the city was chasing them. Jasmine's hands clenched the wheel at 10 and 2, eyes fixed ahead like a laser. The girl sat beside her, clutching Toby's body in the blanket, whispering his name with every bump in the road. "Stay with me, Toby. Stay!" Her voice was hoarse with hope and panic. "You're stronger than this. Just hang on." The veterinary emergency clinic loomed ahead, an aging building with a flickering sign and too much silence. Jasmine didn't wait for instructions. She kicked the car door open, marched into the lobby with Toby cradled like a newborn, and slammed her congressional ID down on the counter. "He needs surgery," she said, voice like steel. "Now!" The receptionist blinked in stunned silence. Jasmine didn't wait for her to respond. "This dog is dying. Internal obstruction, probable sepsis. And if you make us wait for intake paperwork or a deposit, I'll shut this entire place down by morning." The words weren't a threat. They were a verdict, a promise made from the depths of a woman who had built her career dismantling the machinery of neglect. Behind the desk, a vet tech rushed to the door. "Bring him!" she shouted toward the rear hallway. Two more techs appeared, rolling a gurney. Jasmine laid Toby gently across it. "Careful, his abdomen is rigid. He's slipping fast." They rushed the gurney down the corridor. The doors flung shut behind them. The girl stood motionless in the center of the lobby, arms still curved around the air where Toby had been just moments ago. "I don't know if I waited too long," she said quietly. Jasmine turned to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not soft, not coddling, but firm, resolute. "You didn't wait," she said. "You acted, when no one else would." The girl blinked, but she didn't speak. Her hand fell slowly to her side, fingers trembling like the last ember of a fire not quite gone out. They had handed over a life, not a file, not a case, but a living, dying fragment of love. And now, as the doors swung shut behind the veterinary team, the weight became unbearable. And when the vet finally returned, the look on his face told them everything. The clock had already started ticking. He walked out wearing gloves still streaked with iodine and urgency, his scrub top damp at the chest. There was no clipboard smile, no pause to soften the truth. "The dog's in bad shape," he said, voice flat but heavy. "There's a hard obstruction in his intestine. Feels like plastic or cloth. He hasn't passed anything in at least 48 hours, maybe longer. He's severely dehydrated. His body's starting to shut down." The girl stood like a statue, gripping the edge of the reception desk as if it were the last stable surface in a world tilting around her. "Is he going to die?" she asked, her voice barely audible, almost apologizing for the question. The vet exhaled slowly, but his words were brutal. "If we don't operate immediately, yes." Jasmine inhaled through her nose, slow and sharp, like preparing for battle. "Then operate," she said. "No question. No delay." The vet hesitated, looking between the girl and the woman whose presence suddenly felt like courtroom thunder. "The procedure's complicated," he said. "It requires anesthesia, a sterile team, overnight ICU. It's going to run into the thousands." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice rising, not in volume, but in force. "And?" The man blinked. "Well, most families. There's usually a payment discussion before." Jasmine cut him off with a single slicing sentence. "You're not going to let a child watch the last thing she loves bleed out over a billing form." The silence after that was nuclear. Even the receptionist, who had been typing something without purpose, froze mid-keystroke. "I'll cover the cost," Jasmine continued, her tone hard enough to crack marble. "Run the surgery. Bill me. I don't care what it takes. Save him." The girl's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Her hand hovered in the air, as if reaching for something she never believed existed. Intervention, mercy, hope. Jasmine didn't look at her. She didn't have to. Her focus was on the vet now, like a lawyer locking in on a judge. That dog is family. That child is not disposable. And if you delay one more minute talking about numbers, I'll ensure your license is reviewed by morning." The vet didn't argue. He gave a single curt nod and turned sharply on his heel, calling out for prep, anesthesia, saline. The door swung open. The gurney rolled through, the curtain dropped behind it, and just like that, the fight for Toby's life had begun. The gurney disappeared through swinging doors, swallowing the fragile life they'd fought to protect. In its wake, only silence remained, until the girl sank into a plastic chair, her arms curled around the empty blanket, like it still held the heartbeat of someone she couldn't afford to lose. She didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, head bowed, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow her whole. But then, in a voice that barely cracked the hum of the fluorescent lights, she said, "My mom used to work in a place like this." Jasmine turned slightly, listening, not pressing, just present. The girl's hands tightened around the fabric in her lap. She wasn't a vet. She never had the money for school. But she was a tech. Night shifts, weekends, holidays. She knew how to calm animals with just her hands, like magic. Her throat hitched, but she kept going, her words rolling out like a dam finally breaking. She'd bring me along sometimes, quietly. I'd sit in the back, watch her clean wounds, hold dogs that were too scared to breathe. She used to whisper to them, said animals never pretend to hurt. They only pretend to be okay. That's why they need people who listen. She paused, her voice cracking on the next line. I keep thinking, if she were still here, Toby wouldn't be like this. I would have known what to do sooner. He wouldn't have suffered. Jasmine didn't interrupt. The girl's fist curled tighter. After she died, no one talked about her. Not my uncle. Not anyone. Like she'd been erased. I tried to remember what she taught me. I wrote it all down in a notebook. But I lost it when we left the house. I lost everything. Her chest heaved, but she refused to cry. I know I'm just a kid. I know no one's going to hand me anything. But I wanted to help. I wanted to save him. And I still might lose him anyway. Jasmine leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, eyes locked on the girl like nothing else existed in the world. You didn't lose her, she said. You carried her here, in your hands, in every decision you made when everyone else gave up. That's not failure. That's legacy. The girl looked up, and in her eyes was a kind of disbelief, hope twisted with fear. Jasmine's voice grew firmer. When I was your age, I didn't have much either. My mom cleaned offices at night. I used to sleep on the floor behind her mop cart because we couldn't afford a sitter. I wore the same shoes for 2 years, the same coat for 3. Kids made fun of me for how I smelled, for how I talked, for dreaming too loud. She took a breath, not to pause, but to steady the storm in her own chest. I told someone I wanted to be a lawyer. You know what they said? Girls like you don't win cases, you wait tables for the men who do. And when I said I wanted to be in Congress, they laughed like I'd told a joke that would never end. Jasmine leaned closer. Her voice didn't rise, but it deepened, sharpened, until each word struck like a gavel. But I didn't stop, because somewhere deep inside I knew that if I ever got power, I wouldn't use it to be above people. I'd use it to stand beside the ones who've been stepped over their entire lives. The girl stared at her. No more doubt, no more deflection, just silence carved with awe. I want to be a vet, she said suddenly, not whispered, declared. Like my mom, I want to help animals. I want to make it mean something. Her voice cracked again, but it didn't collapse. But I don't know if anyone will ever believe I can. Jasmine nodded slowly. You don't need everyone to believe, she said. You just need one person to start. She placed her hand gently over the girl's. And I do. The girl didn't answer. But the way she gripped Jasmine's hand, tightly, desperately, said everything she couldn't yet say out loud. The flicker of hope the girl had just begun to trust was snatched back into suspense as the doors burst open once more. This time, with the weight of life and death riding behind them. And Jasmine knew before the vet even spoke, something had shifted. The vet's face told half the story before his words even landed. Sweat beaded near his temples, and the urgency in his stride was sharpened now, refined into clinical finality. He's crashing, he said. Dehydration, fever. His oxygen dropped twice while we stabilized him. The girl froze in her seat, her knuckles turning white against the armrest. He's barely strong enough for surgery, the vet continued. If we wait, he dies. But if we take him in now, there's a chance his heart won't make it past the incision. Jasmine stood, calm but electrified. "You said chance," she said. The vet nodded. "Yes, it's a razor's edge, and we need consent now." He held out the form like it was a weapon and a prayer in one. "This waives our liability," he said. "Surgery is high risk. He could arrest, bleed out. We won't have time to call you if that happens. Once he's under, it's all in the hands of the table." The girl looked up at Jasmine, her lips trembling but locked tight, like any sound would collapse her. Jasmine met the vet's eyes, and her voice, when it came, was as unwavering as steel being forged. "Where do I sign?" The clipboard hit the counter. The pen slid across without a word. Jasmine signed not with desperation, but with purpose. Her name etched across the paper like a final wall between the girl and another unbearable loss. As she handed it back, the girl reached out and took her hand, not with the fragility of a child, but the intensity of someone hanging off a ledge with no harness. Jasmine didn't flinch. She squeezed back. "He's not going down without a fight," she said softly, not as comfort, but as command. The vet turned without another word and disappeared through the swinging metal doors, which closed behind him with a sound that felt too final, too loud. And then came the wait. Not the kind padded by music or distractions, but the raw, oxygenless kind. The girl sat beside Jasmine, shoulders folded inward, eyes fixed on nothing. Every breath sounded too loud, too fast. The room was still, but her world was spinning. The hands of the clock on the far wall moved like a slow-motion pendulum, ticking in sync with her heartbeat, and each tick was a countdown she couldn't stop. A cough echoed down the hallway. A nurse passed through, didn't make eye contact. Jasmine stared ahead, unmoving, every fiber in her body alert, but calm, like the eye of a storm that refused to break. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. There was only time, and the impossible weight of waiting for it to end. Time had twisted itself into something cruel, each second heavier than the last, until the doors finally creaked open again, and the vet stepped out. This time he wasn't carrying fear. He was carrying something rarer, fragile, trembling, hope. He pulled off his gloves one finger at a time, his eyes scanning the room until they found the girl and settled there. "He's alive," he said, and the words hit like oxygen. "We found a blockage, thread, some kind of plastic tie, maybe from a toy or a food wrapper. It was coiled around itself, cutting off everything. His intestines were bruised, inflamed. He was minutes away from rupture." The girl blinked, slowly, as if afraid her ears had deceived her. "But he made it?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. The vet nodded. "He's still with us, but he's very weak. We've got him on fluids, antibiotics. He'll be in pain when he wakes up. It'll be 2 weeks before he's stable enough to go anywhere. And even then, he'll need care. Constant, gentle, no stress, no trauma. If we give him that, he has a real chance." The girl lowered her face into her hands, not crying, just folding, like her body had finally run out of ways to carry the fear. Jasmine stood beside her, one hand resting gently on her back. But before she could speak, the girl's voice broke through the quiet like a blade through silk. "I can't take him home." Her words weren't dramatic. They were resigned, final. "My uncle. He'll say this proves I can't be trusted, that I'm reckless, that I wasted everyone's time." She looked up and her eyes had changed. The terror was deeper now. "He'll say I've made Toby weak, that I've ruined him, and then he'll tell me to choose, him or me. And I can't do that." Jasmine knelt, slowly, deliberately, so she could look the girl in the eye, not from above, but beside. "You won't have to," she said, and her voice carried no hesitation, only steel. "You're not going back there. Not now, not ever." The girl's breath caught. "But I don't have anywhere else." Jasmine shook her head. "You didn't," she said, "until tonight." The girl blinked hard, shoulders trembling. "You don't get it," she whispered. "Nobody ever keeps me. They take me because someone makes them. Foster parents, caseworkers, teachers. I'm just part of their job." Her fists clenched. "They always act like they care, but then they give up. They always do." Jasmine's jaw tightened. I'm not them. She said it with such force that even the air between them seemed to pause. You fought to save Toby when you had nothing. No money, no backup, not even a safe place to sleep. And now it's my turn to fight for you. Her voice softened just slightly, but not her resolve. You saved his life. That matters. You matter. I will find somewhere safe. Somewhere real. Not another room with locked cabinets and people who forget your name after a week. A place that sees you. All of you. The girl didn't speak. Her lip quivered, but she held it tight. And then slowly, so slowly, she reached for Jasmine's hand and squeezed it like a thread pulled taut between despair and something she didn't yet know how to believe in. Belonging. She had made a promise. And in Jasmine Crockett's world, promises weren't made to comfort. They were made to be delivered, even if the system fought her every inch of the way. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jasmine stepped out into the hallway, her phone already in her hand like a drawn weapon. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with purpose, slicing through the sterile silence of the clinic like declarations in a courtroom. She didn't call a shelter. She didn't call child services. She called Ava Martinez, a woman who didn't blink at trauma, who didn't flinch from broken things. Ava ran a nonprofit in rural Maryland known as the Haven Line Project, a sanctuary for children with no one left and animals that had been thrown away twice over. Jasmine didn't waste time with greetings. She's 12, she said into the phone. Ran away to save her dog, slept in alleyways, watched him almost die in front of her, and she still walked into that clinic like a soldier. She doesn't need pity, she needs placement. Fast. There was silence on the other end. Jasmine knew Ava was already calculating personality, compatibility, crisis layers, grief density. Then her voice came low and unwavering. We've got one open home. It's not temporary. It's not a bed for the weak. It's the Pierces, Vietnam-era vet. Wife's a retired animal behaviorist. 10 acres, fenced, quiet. They lost their daughter 3 years ago and swore they'd never foster again until they started working with rescue animals. Jasmine's throat tightened. Would they take her? Another pause, then, if she's who you say she is, they'll open the gate tonight. Jasmine didn't thank her. She just said, send me the address. She returned to the waiting room like someone carrying classified orders from the front lines. The girl looked up, eyes wide, as if afraid the moment would vanish before it began. You were gone a long time, she said, trying to sound neutral, but her voice cracked halfway through. Jasmine knelt in front of her again, the way she had the night before, eye level, heart forward. There's a place, she said, not a shelter, a real home, a family with dogs, land, and quiet. They don't do charity, they do trust. They take in survivors. You and Toby would be the first kid-dog pair they've accepted in over a year. The girl blinked hard. Her breath caught. Will I have to explain everything again, she asked, voice trembling under the weight of 100 traumas. Jasmine shook her head slowly. Number, they already know enough. And what they don't, they'll let you share on your time. No files, no labels, just healing. The girl's hand reached for Jasmine's jacket, clutching it without looking. And Toby? She whispered. Jasmine answered with the weight of a judge's gavel. Where you go, he goes. That's the rule now. The girl looked down, but not in shame. This time, it was disbelief unraveling into something more dangerous, something sacred, hope. The road that brought them here wasn't long in miles, but in meaning, it stretched for lifetimes. And as Jasmine pulled onto the gravel driveway, past open fields and barking joy, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it in the girl's eyes. Awe, laced with fear. The house rose ahead like a painting too gentle to be real. White siding kissed by the late afternoon sun, a wide porch with peeling railings that somehow made it feel even more lived in. A hammock swayed lazily between two trees. A wind chime rattled softly in the breeze. But what stole the girl's attention, what made her stiffen in her seat, were the dogs. 5 of them, maybe 6, scattered across the wide green yard. Not leashed, not chained, running, barking, tails high. They played like creatures who had forgotten cages ever existed. Jasmine stepped out first and opened the back door slowly, letting the moment breathe. "Take your time," she said gently, watching the girl's knuckles whiten around Toby's crate. The girl stepped out onto the gravel, each motion cautious, as if the ground might collapse if she moved too fast. Her eyes darted from the porch to the open field to the woman walking down the front steps. Mid-60s, sun-browned hands, hair in a loose braid. She didn't speak right away, just knelt beside the crate and peered through the mesh. "He's a fighter," the woman said softly, "but I imagine he had help." She looked up at the girl, who stood frozen like a soldier who couldn't drop her armor. Then a man appeared in the doorway, quiet, built like a retired Marine with gentle eyes. He nodded once, and even that felt like a welcome. The girl turned to Jasmine, her voice barely more than breath. "Is this really for me?" she asked, the words trembling with more than disbelief. They were laced with years of learned rejection. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She knelt beside her, looked her square in the eye. "Not everyone gets a second chance," she said, voice clear and unshakable. "But you didn't wait for one to fall into your lap. You fought for it. You bled for it. And now you've earned it." The girl blinked hard, her throat moving like she was trying to swallow a lifetime of doubt. She looked back at the porch, at the dogs, at the people who weren't reaching to fix her, just to receive her. Her grip on the crate loosened for the first time, and though she didn't say another word, she stepped forward. Some stories don't end with applause or headlines. They end quietly in moments no one else sees. 1 month later, Jasmine Crockett sat alone at her desk when one of those moments arrived, wrapped in a plain white envelope. It was late evening in her Capitol Hill office, the kind of late where even the janitors had gone home, and the only light came from a single desk lamp, casting soft gold across a pile of unresolved bills and unread memos. Jasmine sat unmoving, her back straight, eyes heavy from the day's political combat. But then, at the very top of her mail stack, she noticed something strange. An envelope, smaller than the rest, with her name handwritten in neat, hesitant strokes. There was no return address, just "To Ms. Crockett" in blue ink that looked like it had paused between each letter, as if unsure it belonged here. She opened it carefully as though the paper might tear more than its surface if rushed. Inside was a single photo, slightly curled at the edges. The image hit her like a slow-motion punch to the chest. It was the girl, standing in a barn lit by warm sunset, wearing a volunteer's vest 2 sizes too big, her name tag crooked but beaming. She was holding a water bowl, gently tilted toward a black and white dog lying on a hay bed beside her. Toby, now clearly gaining weight, his ears alert, eyes soft with the kind of trust that couldn't be faked. Behind them, wooden beams wrapped in string lights formed the shape of a heart. There was dirt on the girl's jeans, straw in her hair, but her smile was whole. Tucked behind the photo was a folded letter, handwritten in that same uncertain but determined hand. "Dear Ms. Crockett, I wasn't sure how to start this. I still don't. They say when someone saves your life, you never forget the sound of their voice. I don't remember all the words you said that night, but I remember how calm you were. Like even when I was breaking, you weren't. I didn't believe people like you stopped for people like me, but you did. You didn't walk by. You didn't tell me to call a number or go to a shelter. You sat down, you stayed, and because you stayed, I got to stay alive. I feed rescue dogs now. I wash cages, I write down meds. I've memorized every dog's name here, and I tell Toby about each one before bed like stories. I still want to be a vet, but now I know I can be one. Not because I'm special, but because I was seen. Thank you for seeing me, for fighting for me like I mattered. I do now. Love." Jasmine didn't move for a long time. The office buzzed faintly with the sound of a distant hallway light and the slow tick of a clock that felt too loud in the silence. She stared at the letter like it was a mirror into a life she thought had already hardened beyond feeling. Then wordlessly, she folded the page with deliberate care, like she was closing something sacred, not shutting it away. She reached to her left, opened the drawer second from the bottom, the one she never let staff touch, and placed the letter inside. Next to the only photo she kept from her own childhood, a faded picture of her mother in scrubs, arms outstretched, standing in front of a South Dallas community clinic with a dog curled at her feet. It was the last time Jasmine saw her mother smile before cancer took her in the same hospital she once volunteered in. That photo had lived alone in the drawer for years. Now it had company. Jasmine closed the drawer softly, not like hiding a secret, but like planting something. And in the quiet hum of that late office night, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat still, staring at the space where the envelope had been. Because sometimes the most radical act isn't standing up in Congress. Sometimes it's choosing, in the middle of a storm, to kneel beside a child and say, "I see you," and knowing one day that child might rise. That drawer clicked shut like a seal on a chapter Jasmine hadn't realized she needed. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It echoed with something heavier than grief, quieter than victory, a reckoning. Jasmine stayed seated in the half-light of her office, elbows on her knees, hands clasped loosely, as if in prayer. Not the kind with saints or scripture, but the kind you whisper when you've seen too much to pretend anymore. The letter sat beside her, its creases still sharp. The photo burned in her mind like an afterimage. A girl, a dog, a life reborn not through grand gestures, but through something far more fragile, attention. The silence pressed in, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She had lived in silences like this before. Courtroom silences before a verdict. Hallway silences after a funeral. The silence of a child waiting for someone to come back who never would. But this one was different. This silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of truth. She leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling as if the words might be written there. Then slowly she spoke. Not to anyone in the room, but to the space, the stillness, the memory. In a world where everybody's rushing to win, to post, to matter louder than the next, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop, she said quietly, her voice the rhythm of memory. Just stop and look and see someone. She stood and walked slowly to the window. Outside, D.C. glowed as it always did, urgent, indifferent. The Capitol dome stood like a monument to ideals far removed from the streets, where children froze alone under broken streetlights. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. "I almost didn't," she murmured. "That night, I had a driver waiting, a dozen emails flashing red, a fundraiser to prepare for. And God knows I've walked by people before. People with signs, people with stories, people with eyes asking questions I didn't want to answer." Her reflection stared back at her, faint in the pain. Older now, sharper, but not harder, not tonight. "I used to think you needed a title to make change," she said. "Congresswoman, judge, director, as if justice only lived in marble rooms with microphones. But that night, it lived in the back of a diner booth, in the quiet cracking of a child's voice, in a decision to sit instead of walk away." Her breath fogged the window slightly, then cleared. "She didn't ask me for much, just space, a few minutes. And when I gave that, everything else unfolded, like the world had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to care long enough to exhale." Jasmine turned from the window, walked back to her desk, and touched the drawer again. Not to open it, just to anchor herself in the weight of what it now held. "She reminded me," she whispered, "of myself, or who I could have become if someone hadn't stopped for me when I was a kid with more anger than answers." There was a long pause as she sat back down, eyes unfocused now, drifting somewhere between past and present. "How many people," she asked, not aloud but not silently either, "have I walked past? How many lives were quietly asking for help, and I never looked twice?" She closed her eyes and saw the girl again, hunched in the rain, arms wrapped around a soaked cardboard sign the night they met. She had looked like background, like tragedy too far gone to salvage, but she wasn't. She never was. "She was never invisible," Jasmine said, each word landing like a slow drumbeat. "We just trained ourselves not to see." She leaned back in her chair, exhaled deeply. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. The city kept moving. "How many moments like that do we miss?" she asked softly, voice lined with something between wonder and guilt. "All because we're 5 minutes late, or afraid of discomfort, or convinced someone else will stop instead? She looked around the office. The framed legislation, the awards, the flags, all the symbols of impact. And yet tonight, none of them felt as heavy as a handwritten letter from a girl no one thought would survive the month. In a world that measures success by how far you climb, she said, her voice trembling slightly, maybe we ought to start measuring it by how often we kneel beside someone who's fallen. The room grew still again. She folded her hands, this time not in thought, but in reverence, for the story that had landed in her lap, not by strategy, but by serendipity, for the kind of change that doesn't come with headlines or speeches, the kind that changes one life, one night, one dog, one girl, and maybe, if the world's watching closely enough, one nation's sense of what matters. The clock ticked once more, and with it, a final question rose. Not for applause, not for approval, but for anyone willing to hear it echo. How many people do we walk past each day and miss the chance to do the only thing that ever truly changes the world? To stop. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since that night. A single question echoed in her mind, relentless as a heartbeat. What if I hadn't stopped? Not out of guilt, but clarity. What if she had climbed into the black SUV, pulled out of that parking lot, and let that girl become someone else's burden or no one's? The truth was brutal in its simplicity. No one else had stopped. Not the donors in suits. Not the waitstaff who glanced and turned away. Not the passing strangers too caught up in their timelines and to-do lists. They all kept moving, cloaked in the same armor Jasmine herself once wore. Urgency, distraction, detachment. The armor of survival in a city too fast to feel. But what if one of them had stopped? What if any of them had seen the girl as more than a silhouette in the rain? The world might never know how close it came to losing her. And Jasmine, who had stood her ground in courts and committees, felt a deeper truth settle in her gut. A truth sharper than any political betrayal. We don't fail because we can't help. We fail because we don't stop to notice who needs help in the first place. It wasn't the first time she'd seen suffering. Jasmine grew up watching her mother work double shifts as a hospital janitor, wiping floors beneath beds of people who never bothered to say thank you. Her mother never asked for recognition, but she asked her daughter one thing every night before Jasmine fell asleep. Did you pay attention today? Not just to what you want, but to who's hurting? Jasmine used to think it was a lesson in kindness. Now she knew. It was a warning. Because pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It walks quietly. It sits at the edge of sidewalks holding soaked cardboard signs. It answers, I'm fine, and when it's not. It dresses up as strength when it's really surrender. And if you're not looking, really looking, you'll miss it. Just like so many missed that girl. She remembered the girl's fingers wrapped around Toby's fur, as if letting go meant losing him forever. Remembered the way she sat at that diner, flinching at loud noises, scanning the room for exits like she'd had to memorize escape routes. That wasn't just trauma. That was survival. And Jasmine remembered what the girl said, almost too quietly to hear. I didn't think people like you stop for people like me. That sentence shattered her more than any courtroom defeat ever had. It made Jasmine question everything. Her campaigns, her slogans, her speeches. She had always fought for justice, but maybe she had forgotten the smallest battlefield, the sidewalk. Maybe she had been so focused on systemic change that she'd forgotten personal intervention was its root. One girl, one dog, one decision. That was the lesson, and it didn't end at that diner, or the vet, or the photo in the envelope. It followed Jasmine into every room now. It whispered at every committee hearing. It pulsed behind every headline. Every time she heard a colleague refer to the homeless problem or kids in the system, she didn't hear statistics anymore. She saw her. She saw the night someone almost walked past the story that changed everything. The injustice, Jasmine realized, was never just the cruelty people inflicted. It was the ease with which others watched and moved on. The indifference, the polite avoidance, the ability to look suffering in the face and call it not my business. But it was her business. It was everyone's business. Because in a world this interconnected, there's no such thing as someone else's problem. There's only what we choose to notice and what we pretend not to. Jasmine's hands curled around the letter again. It smelled faintly of dog fur and lemon soap. She wondered how long the girl had stared at the blank page before finding the courage to write. She wondered what it took for someone who had been discarded to believe their words mattered. And she thought of Toby, the dog who refused to eat unless someone sat beside him, who waited at the door long after his people were gone, who bore his own kind of grief, silent and sacred. It made her wonder, how many Tobys were out there now? How many kids clutching leashes to memories, trying to protect what little they had left? More than she could count. More than anyone wanted to admit. But numbers didn't matter. Moments did. Jasmine stood up slowly, placing the photo and letter gently into the top drawer of her desk, next to the only other item she kept there. A faded photo of her mother, smiling in scrubs outside the hospital, holding a lunchbox in one hand and a stack of patient charts in the other. That woman taught her to listen, to slow down, to see. And tonight, Jasmine made herself a new promise. Not political, not performative, a personal one. Never walk past again. She walked to the window, cracked it open, and let the cold air bite. It reminded her of that night, the slick street, the trembling girl, the silence heavy with unsaid things. She thought about how close that story had come to ending differently. And then, for the first time in a long time, Jasmine Crockett cried. Not because she was sad, but because she finally understood the most terrifying truth of all. We are the answer to each other's pain. No law, no government, just us, stopping, asking, staying. And in that truth, sharp, inconvenient, and beautiful, Jasmine found her clearest mission yet, to fight not just for the unheard, but for the unseen. Because sometimes the greatest revolution is simply refusing to keep walking. She stands at the window with the city glittering beneath her, like a constellation of unfinished stories. And in the humming quiet, Jasmine Crockett feels the letter's weight convert into fuel, realizing that the line between ordinary routine and extraordinary rescue is only ever a heartbeat long, which means every person who hurries past suffering is choosing, consciously or not, to let a life unravel. So in this lingering breath, she resolves to turn memory into marching orders for anyone who will listen. We live in an age where convenience is a narcotic, where algorithms curate our compassion and headlines speed date our outrage, where a child can shiver on a curb outside a five-star restaurant while million-dollar cars glide by on silent electric engines, where a veteran panhandles beneath a 20-story ad for luxury condos, where a dog's cries echo behind a boarded garage as crates of fresh groceries roll past. And the true obscenity isn't poverty or pain, but the practiced indifference we polish into normalcy every single day. So hear this. The revolution begins not with podiums or polls, but with presence. Because stopping for one frightened girl and her dying dog carved a fault line through the inertia of an entire metropolis. Jasmine's simple question, "Are you okay?" became a battering ram against centuries of "not my problem," proving a brief pause can swing wider doors than any speech delivered to a room already convinced. Imagine right now the unseen theater of desperation unfolding beyond the glow of your phone. A runaway teen counting coins beneath a flickering lamppost. A trafficked child staring through a motel window at people who might be heroes if they only noticed. A battered woman rehearsing excuses while she hides bruises in a public restroom. An immigrant day laborer collapsing from heat beside the highway. A stray with ribs like xylophone bars chasing after a car that will never stop. Each scene waiting for a single witness bold enough to trespass against indifference. You do not need a badge, a budget line, or a blue-check profile to intervene. You need only the audacity to let compassion disrupt your schedule. Because every hierarchy that excuses apathy, class, race, politics, fatigue, crumbles the moment one person refuses to treat another human life as background scenery. And if Jasmine could leverage a rain-soaked moment into a lifetime of possibility for a stranger, then the rest of us have no defense for our silence. Think of the arithmetic of avoidance. Every time you ignore a trembling hand, the cost compounds. Emergency rooms overflow, shelters buckle, prisons swell, headlines harden, innocence curdles into violence. Democracy erodes one unseen citizen at a time until the bill comes due in blood, and we wonder how the nightmare started when the answer was stitched into the small choices we justified as too busy. So the mandate is disarmingly simple. Pause, look, ask, stay. Let your feet halt instead of hurry. Let your eyes meet the ones society teaches you to avoid. Let your voice become a bridge rather than a barrier. And if fear whispers, you'll be dragged into chaos. Remember that chaos is already here, stalking the ignored corners of every city, and the only antidote is deliberate, inconvenient kindness. Because when you stop, you ignite a chain reaction. The girl survives, the dog heals, the foster family discovers purpose, the nonprofit gains momentum, lawmakers glimpse humanity beyond statistics, a neighborhood witnesses redemption in real time, and somewhere down that line, another passerby decides they too will intervene, turning a single act into a widening current powerful enough to erode the bedrock of systemic neglect. Let this be your directive. Volunteer at the overcrowded clinic, mentor the kid nobody picks for teams, donate before disaster strikes, call out cruelty even when it ruins dinner conversation, vote like every box on the ballot hides a life in the margins, amplify stories that won't trend without you, build workplaces where people are valued more than profit, and above all, cultivate the reflex to stop and keep stopping until stopping is no longer radical but ordinary. So the next time the world blurs by in a rush of deadlines, earbuds, and glowing screens, remember the girl who found a future because one stranger refused to walk past. Ask yourself how many miracles are stranded on the shoulder of your daily commute, and choose to be the interruption, the inconvenient witness, the necessary pause, because history isn't written only by great speeches and towering laws, but by every quiet soul who decides, at whatever personal cost, that no life will disappear into the dark unchallenged on their watch. Resolve alone is a silent oath. Action is the roar that makes it real. Jasmine knows the roar must come from all of us, so hear this, and let it punch through your chest like a starter's pistol. Imagine a single downtown sidewalk at dawn. Commuters speed walking past a boy, cradling a shivering dog beneath a flickering street lamp. In that instant, you decide comfort can wait. You crouch, you ask, you listen, and the world's axis shifts because you refuse to treat a living crisis as scenery. Cruelty's favorite weapon is convenience. We scroll tragedies, mute sirens, step over cardboard pleas, then excuse ourselves with busyness while injustice fattens on our hurry. Yet every overlooked life is a deferred catastrophe that will boomerang as crowded ERs, colder prisons, angrier streets. Revolutions are seeded by people who interrupt this cycle, who convert empathy into logistics, buying a meal, calling a clinic, rallying strangers in a waiting room, hammering city council inboxes until policy budgets human worth. Do not underestimate the contagion of one pause. A nurse waives an intake fee after you speak up. A bystander volunteers to drive. A reporter live streams the moment. Donations flood. A counselor drafts a no-kill ordinance. And suddenly the sidewalk where you stopped becomes the epicenter of a widening moral quake. Expect ridicule, bleeding heart, virtue signaler, soft. But remember, cynicism is the anthem of comfortable bystanders, and your defiance is proof their anthem is dying. Carry the memory of a dog's fading pulse and a girl's shaking voice as armor against their derision. Translate outrage into habit. Schedule a monthly clinic shift. Budget a standing donation. Keep care kits in your trunk. Practice eye contact with the invisible. Teach your children that mind your business is sometimes the cruelest phrase in English. If you command resources, weaponize them. Fund scholarships that tether foster kids to futures. Underwrite mobile vet vans. Push companies to audit pay gaps. Remind legislators that budgets are moral manifestos. If you hold only stamina and sincerity, wield them like a crowbar, pry open conversations, break the locks of apathy, Sit beside pain until it trusts relief. A sandwich offered with dignity can reroute a stranger's trajectory more decisively than 1,000 retweets. Let discomfort be your compass, compassion your fuel, imagination your map. Envision cities where bus stop ads match volunteers to real-time needs, where zoning laws bake kindness into blueprints, where school graduations require a year of service so that knowledge and empathy graduate together. You are the hinge between indifference and intervention, the thin red thread keeping another life from unraveling. And history will not remember how many errands you ran on schedule. It will echo with the names that breathed easier, because you were late for something unimportant, but right on time to change everything. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.